Welcome to the Thought That Counts podcast, offering you 5 concise audio tips on emotional intelligence and associated topics in this new season. Continuing this series, exploring biases and fallacies that mean we may not be as cognitively or emotionally intelligent as we think. This episode covers introspection, procrastination, the Normalcy Bias, the Bystander Effect, and the Availability Heuristic. I hope you enjoy this episode of The Thought That Counts.
The Thought That Counts.
We pride ourselves on understanding ourselves. We think we know why we like certain things, why we feel a certain way. But what if that self-knowledge is largely an illusion? What if the reasons we give for our preferences and feelings are often just stories we create after the fact? This is the humbling truth about introspection. The misconception is that we have direct access to the inner workings of our minds. We assume we can accurately pinpoint the origins of our likes, dislikes, and emotional states. However, much of our mental processing happens unconsciously, beyond the reach of our conscious awareness. When pressed to explain why we like a particular song or book, why we choose a certain product, or why we feel a certain emotion, we readily offer explanations. But these explanations are often reasons that we come up with afterwards, constructed to make sense of our behaviour. We're essentially making up stories that sound plausible, even if they have little to do with the actual underlying causes. In reality, our preferences and feelings are influenced by a complex interplay of factors, including genetics, past experiences, social conditioning, and subtle environmental cues, which operate largely outside of our conscious awareness. The illusion of self-knowledge can lead to overconfidence in our judgments and decisions. It can also make us less open to feedback and less likely to consider alternative perspectives. Our minds are complex and mysterious. Introspection is the art of trying to understand yourself until you realize how weird you are, and then often the best answer is, I don't know.
The Thought That Counts.
We've all been there, staring at a looming deadline, yet somehow finding ourselves scrolling through social media, cleaning out a drawer we didn't even know existed, or suddenly needing to reorganize our spice rack. We berate ourselves, labeling ourselves as lazy, lacking willpower, and incapable of managing time. The core issue often lies in our struggle to resist immediate impulses and a failure to engage in metacognition, thinking about thinking. We often fail to step back and examine our own thought processes. We don't ask ourselves why we're avoiding a task or what feelings are driving our procrastination. Instead, we get caught in a cycle of avoidance and self-criticism. Our brains are wired for instant gratification. The allure of a quick dopamine hit from a funny video or a mindless game is often far more appealing than the delayed satisfaction of completing a challenging task. Procrastination isn't a character flaw, it's a human tendency. Procrastination is frequently rooted in emotional avoidance. Tasks that trigger feelings of anxiety, overwhelm, or even boredom are prime targets for procrastination. It's not that we don't have the time, it's just that we don't want to deal with the unpleasant emotions associated with the task. As Mark Twain said, never put off till tomorrow what you can do the day after tomorrow just as well.
The Thought That Counts.
We often imagine ourselves heroically reacting to a crisis, our flight or fight instincts kicking in, ready to face danger head on. But the reality is often far different. More often than not, when disaster strikes, our brains do something counterintuitive. They pretend everything's normal. This is the normalcy bias, and it can be dangerously deceptive. The normalcy bias is a cognitive bias that leads people to underestimate the possibility of a disaster and its potential impact. Instead of panicking, we often become abnormally calm, clinging to the belief that things will continue as they always have. We convince ourselves that the alarming situation is temporary or not as severe as it seems. This is because our brains crave stability and predictability. Accepting a crisis means acknowledging a disruption to our perceived reality, which can be deeply unsettling. The normalcy bias acts as a psychological defense mechanism, protecting us from the overwhelming feelings of fear and uncertainty. This bias can lead to critical delays in taking necessary precautions, potentially resulting in increased risk and harm. It's crucial to recognize its limitations. We prepare for what we expect, not for what is possible. By understanding the normalcy bias, we can become more prepared and resilient in the face of adversity. It's a reminder that sometimes the most dangerous reaction is no reaction at all.
The thought that counts.
We've all seen the dramatic rescue scenes in movies. A person cries out for help, and a group of willing, compassionate strangers springs into action. It's a comforting image, reinforcing our belief in human kindness. However, the reality is far more counterintuitive. When someone is hurt, the more people who witness it, the less likely it is that anyone will help. This is the unsettling truth of the bystander effect. The misconception is that safety lies in numbers. We assume that in a crowded situation, someone will surely step up to help. Yet research consistently demonstrates the opposite. The more bystanders present, the lower the probability that any individual will intervene. In a crowd, there's a diffusion of responsibility. Individuals feel less personally responsible to act, assuming that someone else will take charge. We look to others to gauge how we should react. If no one else appears concerned, we assume the situation isn't serious, even if it is. The bystander effect can have devastating consequences, delaying or preventing crucial assistance in emergencies. It's a reminder that compassion isn't automatic. It requires conscious effort. By understanding this phenomenon, we can break the cycle of inaction and become more responsible members of our communities. When we understand this, we can ensure that we take action as everyone else is an extra in someone else's emergency.
The thought that counts.
We live in an age of information. Statistics, data, and expert opinions are readily available at our fingertips. Surely we should be making informed decisions. Yet our brains often bypass the cold, hard numbers and instead latch on to vivid anecdotes and readily available examples. This is the availability heuristic, and it shapes your worldview more than you realise. The misconception is that we process information objectively, relying on statistical probabilities and comprehensive data. The reality is that we're far more inclined to judge the likelihood of an event based on how easily examples come to mind. If we can recall a single striking instance, it feels more probable than something supported by reams of data. As our brains are designed for efficiency, recalling specific examples is faster and easier than processing complex statistics. This shortcut, while often useful, can lead to biased judgments. Understanding the availability heuristic is crucial for navigating the information age. It's a reminder that our perception of reality is often shaped by the vividness and accessibility of information, not necessarily its accuracy. The sensational news is that my availability heuristic tells me I'm more likely to be attacked by a shark while walking down the street than to win the lottery. I'm Robin Hills from EI for Change, empowering your emotional management.
The thought that counts.